Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis Wright and host David Lamb.
Hello and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us on this Sunday evening. For the next half hour, we've got a panel of experts to deal with a topic that we believe you will be interested in, but it always works better when you join in the conversation, and you see that information at the bottom of the screen all throughout the program tonight. Also, a neat thing that Hollis Wright offers to you, the viewer, is the opportunity to speak with an actual attorney standing by live right now. So take advantage of that opportunity. They'll be standing by there for you all throughout the program tonight. So if something we're talking about kind of triggers a question in your mind, that's the opportunity to pick up the phone and give them a call. Now, leading our conversation, as he does so often, Josh Wright from the firm Hollis Wright. Good to see you, sir.
I think people sometimes question, David, whether or not we actually are on the other side of that phone when they call.
Somebody asked me at church not too long ago if that really was the case. So they called and somebody answered and they were shocked. And
we get some hang-ups.
They're there.
We do get some hang-ups. We answer literally, and I know we've been kind of promoting this, thousands and thousands of calls, texts, and emails per year to the television show, sometimes during the show, sometimes during the week, oftentimes relevant and pertinent to the show itself that day, sometimes related to other topics. And so we're there to help. And if we can't answer the question, we'll get you with somebody that can from a legal perspective to answer it. We're doing an interesting show tonight. We've never shied away from interesting topics and sometimes controversial topics. We're doing a show on prisoner rights. What happens if you are incarcerated? What happens if you've been arrested? And David Gespass is on today at Gespass and Johnson here in Birmingham, does a great job and understands this area of the law. And it's a unique area of the law, and it's a specialty because there aren't a lot of lawyers out there that do exactly what you do.
That's true.
It makes for interesting and complicated conversation to talk through some of this stuff, but I think it's super important, and I think what you do is pretty cool. So it's got to be a calling almost.
Almost, and sometimes it's difficult to reconcile that with actually running a business and making money.
Yeah.
So all of us have to limit the number of cases we do, but we do what we can.
A lot of times, I recall in law school and just after law school working with the Bar Association in helping with pro bono cases, those types of things. A lot of times these cases work into the pro bono arena, do they not?
A lot of times they do.
Okay.
And one of the things for civil rights cases, which these often are, in general, in addition to any damages that are collected, a lawyer can also get attorney's fees and costs on top of that. But for prisoner cases, it becomes more difficult because the Prison Litigation Reform Act has limited the amount of attorney's fees you can get. So there was a case in which, for instance, attorneys won the case but got $1 in damages, were awarded six-figure attorney's fees, and the Supreme Court cut it down to 33 cents.
Gotcha. Almost as a contingency of sorts.
Exactly.
All right, so let's kind of jump off in this topic. We're talking about prisoner rights. How do you kind of define that term, that area of the law?
As limited.
Fair enough.
In general, I'd say that what prisoners have a right to be protected because they're in the custody of the state or whatever jurisdiction it is, and because the people who have control over them have such total control, they also have a responsibility to protect them. However, that protection is limited to what is called deliberate indifference in general, which the Supreme Court says means that they have to know that there's a danger threatening them and disregard the danger in order to recover any damages. So, for instance, an inmate that gets attacked by a fellow inmate, gets cut or whatever, they may bring criminal charges against the other inmate, but unless the authorities knew that there was an actual threat, they are not responsible, even if there was some lapse in security. Okay. Because it has to be significantly more than simple negligence. It has to be something much higher.
You use the term deliberate indifference. It really is these are really constitutional-based claims, are they not?
That is correct, yes.
All right. And so how does that apply? I mean, what gives an inmate the right to have a constitutional liberty in our state if something happens to him in a jail context?
Okay. Well, there are two provisions. One is the Eighth Amendment, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. That applies to any inmate who's already been convicted. The other is due process clause. It's the 14th Amendment provides a right to due process. That applies to people who are in jail because they can't make bond before trial, before a conviction. In our jurisdiction, those are seen in terms of what the requirements are as being pretty equivalent. There's not any difference in the effect. It's just which particular clause of the Constitution applies.
What about, for example, First Amendment rights? Do prisoners have First Amendment rights?
They have some. They have a right, for instance, to practice their religion. So depending on the size of the facility, for instance, some are better able than others, but they have a right, for instance, for Jewish or Islamic prisoners to have kosher or halal food. They have a right to have spiritual guidance. Native Americans have a right to sweat lodges. On the other hand, obviously in a city jail, they don't have all of those facilities. And all of those rights, they have a right, for instance, to free speech, but they don't have access to the press. That's something, by the way, the Free Alabama movement here is advocating for, that press be able to come into prisons on a regular basis on designated days and interview people. They have a right to receive literature, generally if it comes from a publisher or an official source, not from individuals. But they, on the other hand, they don't have a right, for instance, to engage in assembly to protest grievances, because everything in a jail or prison context is subordinated from the view of the courts to the importance of security.
Gotcha.
They have to maintain security, and they're given very, very broad discretion in what they can and can't do.
I know we're getting ready to go to a commercial break. When we come back, I do want to talk about something that is seen in the media a lot, which is medical rights that an individual has. For example, somebody is incarcerated, they have a heart condition, they require certain types of medication, and how that can spill over into a constitutional claim that we sometimes will see in the media.
All right, we'll step aside our first break of the evening as we do so. A couple of reminders, the information at the bottom of your screen, how you can join our conversation. Also, would love to have you like the firm on Facebook. If you'll just search the term Hollis Wright, you'll find them there on Facebook. Also on Twitter as well, Hollis_Wright. So Hollis Wright, you're able to keep up with them on social media as well. A great educational and informational resource. Stay tuned, we've got more of the attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
prison issues, incarceration, prison reform, all topics we're covering tonight on The Attorneys. Would love to have you join our conversation. At the bottom of the screen, you see ways that you can do so. Also, a reminder, one more time, live attorneys standing by to speak with you right now. Great opportunity to get some free legal advice. Josh?
You know, I saw that firm fact coming in from the break that there are 11 million people nationally that cycle in and out of jail on a yearly basis. The population in our jails has skyrocketed over the last years, has it not?
I think it's something like a 500% increase in the last 40 years. And we are, we incarcerate more people than any country in the world.
I have paid attention because I've seen in the media some of our local senators here in Alabama have championed to try and change the way that we incarcerate people. Violent offenders incarcerated, non-violent offenders have other avenues of punishment. What's your general take on some of that stuff?
Well, I think it was Cam Ward who said, if we don't do it, the federal government will. And in fact, he was right. There is now an investigation that's been launched by the Department of Justice into the conditions in Alabama prisons primarily, I think, because of the enormous population and the overcrowding. Now, overcrowding itself is not necessarily a constitutional violation, but when it starts affecting other necessary means of subsistence, how much food you get, how much room you have, whether you're able to bathe, those sorts of things, then it becomes a constitutional question. Then it becomes cruel and unusual punishment. And that, I think, is what the Justice Department is now looking at.
Yeah, so Senator Ward's actually been on our show before. He's a friend of mine, and I know he's significantly championed the building of additional prisons. Where does that stand right now? Do you know?
What I know is that the governor's proposal to get was $800 million or something to build new prisons failed in the legislature. So right now, nothing's happening with it.
Well, we'll see. Can population ultimately result in a constitutional violation? I think you mentioned a little bit about food. Let's talk about medical care, for example. If you're not getting appropriate medical care, or if a loved one of yours that's in jail is not getting appropriate medical care, are there constitutional rights to that?
There are. I'll say that in California there was a big class action because of prison overcrowding, and the focus of it was the fact that there were so many inmates. They were getting not sufficient medical care, and that was a pretty big victory out there. In general, medical care goes to the same thing as I mentioned before, deliberate indifference. It's a very, very high standard. So if a doctor or a nurse looks at an inmate who comes with a complaint, the constitutional level is that they have to know that there's something wrong and not do anything. It's more than mere malpractice. They could be sued for malpractice too if they're negligent. What one can get with prisoners, because they're not the most sympathetic plaintiffs in front of a jury, is questionable. But again, they don't have anywhere else to go. And the same thing for guards. If there's something that's so obvious that a lay person should be able to see it, then their failure to take action to protect them for even a short period of time constitutes deliberate indifference and is actionable.
There's that standard again. You
Exactly.
have to be able to prove deliberate indifference to show the constitutional violation.
That's correct.
Talk to us about the Prison Litigation Reform Act.
That was passed in, I think, 1994, and the concept behind it was there was this claim that too many prisoners were filing frivolous lawsuits on their own, and it was clogging up the courts. And it is a huge disincentive now to litigation for anyone. It applies to anyone who is incarcerated, regardless of whether the claim is from that incarceration or something else. First of all, prisoners have to exhaust what's called administrative remedies. If there's a grievance process, which Alabama, so far as I know in the prisons, doesn't really have anything official, but if there is a grievance process, they have to go through that process. Okay. They have to, know about it, know how to handle it, and then they have to go through it and have some result before they can file suit. They also have to pay filing fees. courts can allow them to do it incrementally, at a little bit at a time, but they actually have to pay. And in federal court now, it's I think $400 to file a case, which for an inmate is 30 years of working at 13 cents an hour or whatever. It also limits attorney's fees, as I mentioned before, which makes it really difficult for lawyers to want to take these cases, and particularly to vindicate rights if there aren't any significant damages. Another part of that is that you can't get damages for mental suffering unless you can prove some sort of physical injury. So, for instance, I have a client now who, for 7 months, was in a jail cell in isolation, not for any violation, but because he had sleep apnea, and the jail didn't want him with other inmates because of the machine he had. Right. They thought it might be a weapon or something, but they put him in this suicide watch cell, which meant that 24/7 lights were on. I think that's torture. But there's this question about absent a physical impairment, he may not even have a claim for damages. I don't think in this case that would be true, but that's sort of the effect of the Prison Litigation Reform Act. And as I said, because it limits so significantly what attorneys' fees, it means that lawyers who are in business have to be really, really careful, much more careful even than before it was passed, as to what cases they can take.
How has DNA evidence, you think, impacted this area of the law? I mean, it sounds like you always hear of an inmate who has just denied they committed a crime for years and years and years, and all of a sudden there's some DNA evidence that has been sitting somewhere in a file that is now used and exonerates that individual and they're released from jail. I would imagine that's become kind of a more popular topic.
It is, and there are these innocence projects around the country. The first one was started by Barry Scheck in New York that have addressed that. And it's something like, and one of the things that you can do, even after conviction, after your appeals are exhausted, and although there are limitations on that as well, but one of the things you can do, if there's newly discovered evidence that you didn't have any ability to get before, that goes to your guilt or innocence and indicates innocence, that can sometimes be raised as a way of getting exoneration. And in fact, there's something like 150 people who are on death row who have now been found to be factually innocent. And almost all of them, either it was because of a confession that was false, or because they found DNA evidence to exonerate them, or some combination of that. And what I think about is, if that's the people on death row, the people we look at most carefully, how many more of the millions of people that get convicted of lesser offenses who end up pleading guilty because they don't have a defense and are placed on probation, but are burdened with a criminal conviction for the rest of their lives, are in fact innocent.
It's interesting. We have brought on a lot of guests and a lot of very interesting topics. This is one of them. David is very passionate about this. You can tell that. It takes passion, compassion, and passion to be able to really get involved in this. One of the things I want to talk about when we come back is a new kind of interesting, popular thing right now called the Holman Project. We're going to talk just a little bit about it, what the status is and where it goes. It's going to be interesting for the viewers.
Looking forward to that. We're stepping aside our final break of the evening. A reminder, a few minutes remaining if you want to join the conversation. I'd love to have you do so. Stay tuned. The final segment of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Tyler Vale with the law firm of Wright. As with any industry, it's important in the legal world to hire an attorney that is knowledgeable and has a track record of success. But with so many attorneys out there and so many different types of cases, how does someone decide the right lawyer to hire? In this week's Legal 411, we're answering the question, what should I consider in hiring an attorney? In-state versus out-of-state, big firm or little firm, recommendations from friends or family, the internet, the phone book, or TV. With so many choices and so much information, it can be an overwhelming task trying to make the right decision. To complicate things, choosing a lawyer is an important and sometimes life-affecting decision and should not be taken lightly. So how do you select an attorney? Do your research. Look the firm up on the internet. Ask friends and family whether they know or have any experience with a specific firm. If you know any local lawyers, ask them about the reputation of the firms you may be considering. Call a local law office and ask if they are handling cases like yours. There's a good chance they can help you, but if they can't, they can always refer you to someone they respect who handles your type of case. And remember, ask questions face to face. Ask about their experience in handling cases like yours, how often someone from their office will be available to you, and what you can expect during the process. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you.
Prisoner Wright's our topic of conversation tonight. Just a really interesting show we've had thus far. A few minutes remaining, so if you'd like to join the conversation, pick up that phone and give us a call. Josh?
All right, so when we went to break, I mentioned this concept of the Holman Project. Can you dissect that for us and just kind of explain a little bit about what it is and the impact it's had? Because I think it really kind of spills over into this concept of overcrowding and the need for more prisons.
It goes to a lot of things as well. The background to that is that there was the Free Alabama movement was formed among inmates with supporters on the outside to advance the human rights of incarcerated individuals. They actually, there were 5 prisons in Alabama, May 1st of this past year, that went on strike for 10 days. And then there was this nationwide strike, I think in 20 states, 44 prisons on September 9th, which was the anniversary of the Attica Rebellion. And many of the leaders of the Free Alabama movement, including one who goes by the sobriquet of Kinetic Justice, has a website and lots of stuff there. We're in Holman, which is a really old and really awful place. One of the principal maximum security prisons in the state, and was in solitary confinement there. But what happened was, after the governor proposed this bill for building new prisons, they moved many of the older inmates that were in Holman to other prisons around the state, brought in a bunch of, and these, let me back up, the Free Alabama movement emphasized nonviolence. They engaged in actions, but always nonviolent. And in fact, were building some relations with correctional officers. They moved them out and they brought in a bunch of young guys who were much more volatile. As a result, there were more than 60 stabbings at Holman in the space of 40 days. And the authorities there apparently said, when guards wanted to report it, don't bother with it, don't bother with it. And ultimately, you may remember, a prison guard was killed, was stabbed and killed, and the place was on lockdown for a while, and they brought in these teams, this is kind of SWAT teams, because so many guards were quitting because it was so dangerous there. Right. And in that sense, the inmates and the guards had a lot in common because they were both subjected to those dangers.
So this kind of goes to the prison overcrowding concept.
It does, absolutely. And people are in tight quarters and they don't get 10 tempers can flare.
So is the Holman Project, is it a filed suit? Is it a class action?
Actually, it is what this one inmate, Kinetic Justice, dubbed as the project, because his view is that the whole point of doing that, the whole point of creating those conditions, was so the governor could persuade the legislature to pass the legislation for the prison building project. So essentially what he's saying is that this idea, the project itself, what he called the project, was a ploy by the governor to get funding to build new prisons and damn the expense in lives and injuries to the inmates and the correctional officers at Holman.
Interesting concept.
Less than 3 minutes remaining, but I want to get this question that we've got in about private prisons. Your thoughts on that, and kind of what's the feedback? What is the thought in the legal community about private prisons?
Well, I can tell you the thought among prisoner rights advocates, which is that they're awful. The idea that you privatize, first of all, that means that there's a profit motive. A private prison, they need inmates, so they want to keep people in, not get people out. In general, and because they're operating for profit, they pay less money to the officers involved. They have fewer services. On the one hand, they don't have the same immunities, but on the other hand, they really provide much less adequate care and safety, and that's why the federal government, up until now, has been trying to reduce them.
About a minute and a half remaining, but I want to give both of you an opportunity. Just a final thought from you for our viewers tonight.
Well, I guess my final thought is that we really need to think about this. We were talking about it earlier. Brian Stevenson said that none of us wants to be defined by the worst thing we ever did. And unfortunately, that is so much of what's happening for inmates. They are given sentences not based on who they are, but on these sort of parameters of what they're charged with and other things like that. And there's no view about how you can change them.
Right.
I think there's probably a lot of people sitting at home tonight that would take the position in Alabama, in a fairly conservative state, that prisoners don't have the type of rights that we're talking about tonight. The Constitution would say otherwise, and the reason that our country's great, one of the many reasons, is that we have constitutional provisions that don't only protect people like us that are sitting here tonight and are not incarcerated, but also protects people that are. And so if you need help, if there's an issue related to constitutional rights, you come to someone like David, and we appreciate you being on.
We absolutely do.
Interesting topic.
Time. Thanks so much, you guys. Thank you for joining us as well. We're all out of time, but we'll see you next time right here on The Attorneys. Have a great week.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.